Kaya Brownlee. This week's webinar is the ACA measurement method, how to pick the right one for you. Today is November 25th. It's a Tuesday. Usually we do these webinars on Thursday, but we had some technical difficulties last week. So thanks for sticking with us. And all of our webinars, our previous recordings, and all future recordings are available on our website, yourobamacareadvisors.com, if Tuesday didn't work out for you. So hopefully you guys are catching up on this. Again, my name is Kaya Bromley. I'm the president of Your Obamacare Advisors and author of the book, The Employer's Guide to Obamacare. I've been working on the ACA for the last several years. My specialty is mostly with franchise businesses, any business that has a large number of lower wage, minimum wage workers, because I've noticed that it's the hardest to implement the ACA for you. Because most of you have the most number of employees that you didn't insure in the past and you have to insure now. And so this webinar series is specifically for those of you who are trying to implement and need a little bit of assistance along the way. This webinar series is sponsored by Freedom Care Benefits. Freedom Care Benefits is a program that I helped to form. I advised them as they were creating their program. I advised them on the ACA. And they are a completely guaranteed ACA compliant solution. So if you are a broker with different benefit programs that you're telling people about, or you are an employer who has not yet picked your plan, I strongly recommend checking out Freedom Care Benefits, because it is, if you've been on any of my previous webinars, you hear me talking about staying out of that penalty A and finding ways to guarantee compliance. And there's attorneys all across the country who agree with me on this, and this is one of those programs that I'm talking about, so check that out. As always, this is my warning. This is not a substitute for legal advice, and usually I'm telling you guys not to delay or not to panic. This week, I'm going to tell you something different. I'm going to say if you have not done anything yet, you should be a little bit panicked, because the law goes into effect on January 1st, and even if you have a non-calendar year plan, if you find out too late that you were not in compliance, your penalties are going to begin to accrue as of January 1st. So I'm no longer telling you to stay calm. I'm telling you that you better do something, and quickly. Because if you also think about it, your open enrollment has to all take place before January 1st, and you're running out of time. So before I jump into the measurement methods, let me go back to some of the basics. If you recall, the employer mandate tells applicable large employers that they have to offer 70% of their full-time employees minimum essential coverage or pay a penalty. The topic, if you've been on any of my webinars before, you know that I could talk for 3 hours on each of these words here. But today we're going to talk about the term full-time employees and why that's important to you. So full-time employees, the definition of a full-time employee is an employee who averages 30 hours of service per week. Now, hours of service doesn't mean actual hours worked. It means hours that the employee is entitled to be paid. 130 hours of service is the monthly equivalent of 30 hours of service. The rule I wrote this in here so that you understand that it's not just a straight you can't just use the numbers. It also has to be applied reasonably and consistently across the workforce. So a lot of people still, I'm hearing, it scares the heck out of me. A lot of people are still trying to get cute with these rules and, try to read things into them that do not fit with the legislative intent of the rules. So you have to be careful. If you think that you found a strategy that allows you to get around something, you're probably wrong. So be really careful. So let's talk about what if you get it wrong. Well, penalty A, as you know, is $2,000 per full-time employee. It's triggered when any of your full-time employees goes to the exchange, you get the subsidy. Penalty B is $3,000 per full-time employee, and it's paid for each employee that goes to the exchange, you get the subsidy. The violation of the 90-day waiting period rules is $100 per employee per day, and is also could subject you to lawsuits if you get this wrong. So it's very important that, and if you've heard me say many times, penalty A is the easiest to trigger, it can be the most expensive, and it's also the easiest to avoid. Penalty A is the penalty for not offering minimum essential coverage at all to all of your employees. So it's very important to make sure that you avoid penalty A at all costs. That's the one that at the beginning I was talking about Freedom Care Benefits. That's the one that gets you out of penalty A. So now that I've painted the picture of how screwed you're going to be if you get this wrong, let me tell you how not to get it wrong. Also, I want to talk about the importance of this measurement period. This is basically the foundation of your entire ACA strategy. It's the first measurement that you do. If you get this measurement wrong, everything else that you do is based on flawed data. So I can't underestimate the importance of this, and I also don't want to sugarcoat it. It's also one of the most complicated. There's not a single employer that my team and I have worked with, and we've worked with hundreds. There's not a single employer that was getting it right before we stepped in, or there was not something that we were able to help them do better. So this is a huge area of strategy and planning that you need to work on. So what I'm going to do in this webinar is I'm going to walk through the basics of the measurement methods, some of the strategic things that you need to think about, and then as always at the end and throughout the webinar, I'm going to give you my tips and strategies on how to use the one that works best for you. So the first step of determining employee status is full-time is that you can use one of two different measurement methods. There's something called a monthly measurement method and a look-back measurement method. First, let's talk about the monthly measurement method. The monthly measurement method just means that you're counting your employees' hours of service for each month. 130 hours equals full-time. It's a pretty straightforward. That's really it. There's some nuances here. If you were to get into this, you can contact us and I can get you the nuanced rules. But I don't like to go into the weeds on these webinars, so I'm going to give you really the broad overview of what you need to know. The problem with this very straightforward, very easy approach is that you're not often going to know until the end of the month if an employee is not full-time. So if you're using all salaried workers, and you know everyone's going to be full-time and you're going to offer everyone insurance at the beginning of the month, you don't have a problem. Use the monthly measurement method, easy, done. However, if you have a part-time or variable hour workforce, this is not going to be the right measurement method for you to use, because you could, at the beginning of the month, hope that they're going to be variable hour, but then at the end of the month, if you find out that they were not, and then at the end of the year, you find out that you didn't offer them insurance in the right amount of time, you pay the $2,000 penalty for every single one of your full-time employees, not just that employee. So I can't stress enough the importance of getting this right and not using this method if you are not going to offer them insurance ahead of time. Now, back to Freedom Care again, if you're going to go ahead and offer insurance proactively to all of your employees, and not so that you don't have to deal with that scheduling and up and down and full-time, part-time, and you're just going to offer the insurance, then you can use the monthly measurement method, and it's a huge administrative burden off your shoulders. So I'm not saying don't use it. It depends on your workforce. It depends on your strategy. If you're going to go ahead and offer the insurance, go ahead and use the monthly measurement method, and don't worry about the administrative nightmare. However, for most of you, we're looking at the look-back measurement method. This is a measurement method that is used for one period to determine later status during a stability period. And don't worry if that's confusing. I'm going to explain exactly what that means to you. I recommend this method for any employers with variable hour employees. So now the rest of what I'm going to be talking about today is going to be focusing specifically on the look-back method, because that's what applies to more employers. So there's basically two measurement periods you have to think about. The first one is the initial measurement period, and the second is the standard measurement period. The initial measurement period begins upon the first day of the employees beginning to work for you, or the first day of the month following their hire date. Okay, so that runs with the employees. Then there's a standard measurement period, which is a fixed period, and that is like the January to December kind of measurement period. So that one is at least 3 months, but not more than 12 consecutive months. Okay, and as I'm going to get into specifics of what these mean to you in the next couple of slides. So every single look-back period corresponds with a stability period. The stability period immediately follows your measurement period and also follows your optional administrative period, which can be up to 3 months. The minimum of a stability period is 6 months. Why is that significant? Because you could have a measurement period of 3 months, but your stability period is still 6 months. Now let's talk, before I get into what happens during those measurement periods, let's talk about classifying employees. If you're using a look-back method, your first time that you measure your employees, you have to classify them as either full-time, variable, seasonal, or part-time. I'm going to go through each definition now. Full-time is one who is reasonably expected at the employee's start date to be full-time, and they are not seasonal. And you'll recall before, full-time means that they're expected to work 30 hours per week. That's a pretty straightforward definition. Variable hour, I usually don't do this to you guys. I usually don't put this many words on a slide, but there's so many nuances in here that you have to know all of these concepts that I put the whole darn thing here, and I'm going to read it to you. An employee is a variable hour employee. It's based on the facts and circumstances of the employee's start date. The employer cannot determine whether the employee is reasonably expected to be employed on average at least 30 hours of service per week during the initial measurement period because the employee's hours are variable or otherwise uncertain. Now, as I always do for you because I love you, I'm going to do that in English. What that means is if you've got an employee that you can't reasonably determine if they're going to be full-time or part-time because sometimes they work 30 hours, sometimes they work 12 hours, then you can classify them as variable hours. This is a place where I hear the most misinformation, and I know I talked about it last week. There's a lot of people out there, including brokers and including some people who say that they've gotten advice from attorneys, who are telling you that you can kind of play with these variable hour rules and offer someone insurance up to 1,560 hours, or not offer them insurance, employ them up to 1,560 hours and then fire them and not have to offer them insurance. That completely disregards the intent of this law, and you're going to get in trouble, and I'm telling you not to do it. Variable hour means you really, really don't know. If you already know that you are going to work them full-time up to 1,560 hours, they're by definition not variable hour. So you have to really take these rules seriously and don't play around with this one. Now, to continue, you can't take into account the likelihood that the employee may terminate employment. I've heard that one also, especially in fast food, where people say, well, these people don't often stay for 6 months. That doesn't matter what you think is going to happen. If they've been working for you full time for 3 consecutive months, you better offer them insurance on the first day of the 4th month. If you don't know what rule I'm talking about, go back and listen to my 90-day rule webinar to understand what rule I just quoted to you. Other factors to consider in determining if someone is variable is how is the job advertised, is the employee replacing someone who is full-time, are comparable positions full or part-time, and the contract terms. So they're not going to just look at the hours that your employee actually worked. When you get audited or you get sued, they are allowed by the regulations to look at all of these outside factors to determine if that was actually a variable hour position or not. The reason for this is because the intent of the law is for you to offer your insurance to your full-time people. So if you're improperly classifying people as variable who are actually full-time, you are going to get charged with a penalty, and it's not going to be pretty. Seasonal employees are any employee who is hired into a position for which the customary annual employment is 6 months or less. If you genuinely have an employee who is in a position like that, you can classify them as seasonal, and you can count them for the first month and then for the first year, and then offer them or not offer them insurance next year. The problem with this one is that only very few employers have seasonal employees that fit into this definition. You know, if you are at a ski resort or a golf club or something, and it really is an employee that you're only hiring for the season, that's one thing. Then you can use this rule. However, a lot of you growers out there, you guys are you call them seasonal, but they don't fall under seasonal under the law because you are sometimes the growing season is longer than 6 months, or some of these people you are using them for 6 months and then or employing them, I should say, for 6 months or for the growing season, and then you expect them to come back for another growing season. So for you, you should disregard the word seasonal and count them as variable if they are truly variable. But you have to be careful with the seasonal hour rule. It's not as clear cut as we would hope that it was. So the last classification is part-time. If as a new employee, you already know that you're only going to work this employee less than 30 hours of service, then you can consider them part-time. However, if you consistently, so let's say you hire someone part-time, they, the employment contract or the ads that you use to hire them all said part-time, but then as soon as you started employing them, you consistently work them full-time, it's probably not going to fly. So you have to really use these classifications properly and then track the hours to make sure that the classifications make sense. Because even though you get to use this look back and stability period, you still are going to be, you still need to follow it reasonably and fairly across your workforce. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of the pitfalls later. Once the initial measurement period is done, then your employees simply become ongoing employees. So that those classifications you only get to use them the first time that you measure them. After that, they're ongoing, and their new stability periods will depend on whatever their last look back period was. And you'll see, I'm going to show you a really cute diagram that I did that's going to really make this clear to you. So first, this is just a standard measurement period, okay? So let's say you use a 12-month look-back period, and you've got an employee who is full-time during the look-back period. That means that employee is full-time during the stability period. So if you figure out that they're full-time during the look-back, you have to offer them insurance during the entire 12 months of the stability period, no matter how many hours they work, even if they go down to part-time. Now, the flip side of that, on one level is also true. On another level, you have to be careful. So let's say you've got someone who's part-time during the look-back, and arguably you get to not offer them insurance during the 12-month stability period. However, there are change in status rules you also need to be careful of. So if they were part-time during the look-back, but then you bumped them up to full-time during the stability period and didn't offer them insurance, arguably they've had a change in status, so it doesn't really work cleanly in the other direction. So be very careful of that. So here's an example of a measurement period with an administrative period. So you've got the 12-month look back. You're allowed to use an administrative period of up to 3 months, and then you've got your 12-month stability. Now let's see how that works in multiple years. You've got your look back, and then when your administrative period begins, your look back begins for the following year. Okay, so it's always a staggering measurement. And if you have questions about that, you can always call us, and we can help. You can retain us to consult with you on this. But this is basically so you understand this is not it doesn't keep rolling. They kind of overlap each other from year to year. So you're constantly measuring your measurement period overall. You're constantly measuring each employee. So every employee also has their own measurement period. So you can see how this can get complicated very quickly and how it can get expensive very quickly. I talked a little bit earlier about changes in status. There's change from full-time to part-time, which you don't really get to benefit from. You still have to offer them insurance even if they change to part-time. If they change from part-time to full-time, if the facts and circumstances surrounding the change say that they've been changed to full-time, you better offer them insurance on the first day of the 4th month or the beginning of the stability period, whichever is sooner. And then also if you're changing measurement periods or testing methods so you've got one group that you were using monthly and one group you were using a look back, and you change an employee from one measurement period to another or one testing method to another, then there's change of status rules that are a little more complicated than this webinar. So if you are doing those things, that's a place where you should have a red flag that you need to get more assistance or do more research about what you need to do. In general, you can't, and this is very general, there's nuances to this rule, as in everything with the ACA, because they like to make it really fun for us. If you're going to change it, you really have to honor whatever the employee's last testing method was or last measurement method was. So you can't just, if someone was full-time and you were using the monthly measurement method and you switch them to look back, the next year, and you say, well, now they're variable hours, so I'm going to switch it. You really can't do that. You have to honor whatever their hours were for the previous year. For those of you who are using seasonal employees, this is a big one for you to understand because, like I said, the seasonal employer rules, there's only a narrow group that this applies to, but the break-in service rules might be more applicable to you. So if you've got an employee that has had no service hours for 13 weeks or longer, then you can consider them a new hire. And that's probably more likely that what will come into play when you've got someone that's working for different growing seasons. And then also there's an alternate rule that can be a little bit confusing. If the employee returning from an unpaid leave, they can be treated as a new hire if they had no service hours for between 4 and 13 weeks, and that period is longer than the employee's period of employment before the absence. So let me say that in English for you. So you've got someone that's working for you for 1 month, and then they leave for 14 to 13 weeks on unpaid leave, whatever that unpaid leave is. You can treat them now as a new hire. That's a big one. If you've got a lot of turnover, you've got either what you consider seasonal or variable hours, that's a rule that will probably come into play for you. Then also, if you've got a returning employee after a family medical leave act, you have to figure out the employee's average hours of service before they went on leave, and that becomes their average for the entire measurement period. And that this rule only applies if you're using the look-back method, so that's an important one too. So that's it for this week, and one of the things I'd like to say before I go is, this look-back method, like I said, is number one, the single most important thing that you are going to do in your entire ACA compliance, okay, because it is the beginning to everything else. And it's also it has the biggest pitfalls because the penalties are so big and they're avoidable, so it's not necessary. What I would tell you is there's a lot of people out there that can help you. Our organization helps with look back and stability measurements, and we help people all the time. We've helped a lot of people save a lot of money doing their look back and stability. There's also a lot of software programs that are out there. I have personally done demos on several of them. Some of them are more expensive than others of them. Some of them are Cadillacs and want you to buy the kitchen sink. Some of them are just basic, with your payroll company. I am a strong advocate of these software programs. So if you have any questions about one that you've heard of and you want to hear, our opinion, feel free to email us. We don't endorse any. We work with a lot of them, and I've seen a lot of good ones. But it's something that don't be a penny wise, pound foolish. It's something that it's worthwhile to invest a little bit of money on, and make sure that brokers, if you are helping people with this, give them disclaimers, because if you get this wrong, they're coming after everybody because the penalties are so big. I don't recommend, unless you're very, very well versed with this, I don't recommend you doing the look back method for people. I recommend that they get the advice of someone who is willing to put, their liability insurance on the line, that they're doing it right, such as a lawyer or someone who is, a certified consultant. If your employee your client does not want to get the advice that they need, then I recommend having them sign a disclaimer saying, look, I've advised you that I'm not a lawyer and that I've advised you that you need to get advice on this, and if you don't, then it's not my fault. That's really important. So join us next week. We'll be back on track for Thursdays beginning next week, and have a happy Thanksgiving. And thank you again to Freedom Care for sponsoring this webinar series, and I'll talk to you guys in a little over a week.